Takuya is an ugly, introverted loser who faked a marriage with his coworker to avoid getting shipped to a new branch. However, after his heart starts skipping multiple beats for her milk factory, he tries to glow up faster than Sung Jinwo just to clap her. It all starts on another busy day at the travel agency. After the boss lady, Asako checks on everyone else to make sure they are handling the tasks assigned to them. She gets to Takuya and asks for an update, but he is too busy clearing his search history, so she has to yell to get his attention. After giving him the new reservations to handle, Ayako tells him to stop acting like a scared beta and leaves him wondering why he never has enough aura to make the girls want to talk to him. Just then, Kamiya drops off some new bookings for him to handle and leaves to avoid having to listen to his weird pickup lines again. The next moment, he senses someone with a deadly aura and sees Rika staring like she wants to unalive him, so he immediately gets to work to escape taking a beating from her. After getting home that night, he sets out food for his cat Kama, before making his own. Moments later, he tries to find Kama, but he snags the food away at lightning speed to avoid becoming the pillow he uses to cry himself to sleep. The next day, Kamiya gets hyped to clean up the agency after probably snorting too much nose candy. Meanwhile, Takuya is already getting tired of it, but then he senses Rika staring at him again and receives all the caffeine he needs to get back to cleaning. Rika, who has always disliked his reaction to seeing her, keeps trying to figure out why everyone seems scared of her while working. On her way home later that day, she stops by the store to grab another Atlas book because for some reason, that is what keeps her from completely going off the rails. At home, she gets excited to finally be away from people and spends the night excitedly staring at her maps. The next day, Asako introduces a human walrus named Mamoru from the head office, and they all listen as he explains the company's current goals. She gets tired of his excess talking and interrupts to tell them the agency is going to be putting more focus on its branch in Alaska. After explaining why the branch in Alaska has become the new focus point, Asako says the company is going to make one of them, who isn't in a relationship, take up the position. Mamoru tries to make it sound like a good offer before she starts asking for volunteers, but none of them seem excited to be sent to Santa's hometown. Just then, Takuya raises his hand to tell Asako that he can't go because he has to raise his cat. Asako immediately roasts him for thinking his cat is an excuse and says the offer is best suited for him because no one at the branch is going to miss having to put up with his aura-draining personality. After the meeting, Takuya goes back to work while Kamiya talks to the others about one of their coworkers who got sent to Tahiti and ended up being forced to live there for the past 10 years. She then comes up with the idea of getting married before the one-year volunteering deadline to escape being sent away, but Takuya doesn't even bother to feed into it since he has still not lost his V card. That night, Rika gets back home to her maps and checks the distance before also trying to figure out a way out of going to Alaska. Days later, Takuya finishes with Kama's appointment with the vet and is on his way back when he sees Rika and starts saying prayers in his mind to protect himself from her death stare. Not being at work makes it easier to walk past her, but then he stops and calls her to say that he is grateful for all her help at the agency before telling her that he is going to quit the job. After saying that he will hand in the resignation letter to Asako at the start of the next week, he turns to leave, but then she asks if he is resigning because of Kama. He gets closer so she can see Kama and explains that he is a stray who got picked on by other cats and became very sensitive until he found him. She then asks him why he can't just leave her with a family member, so he tells her there is no one else in his life and apologizes for being so antisocial at work before turning to leave. She suddenly starts talking about the temperature in Alaska, so he turns to hear what she has to say and gets the shock of his life when she suggests getting married to each other. He takes a second to make sure he isn't having any hearing problems before asking her to repeat her suggestion. She then says it is going to be a fake marriage just so they can get out of being sent to Alaska. With such a plan being way out of his comfort zone, he takes a second to think about it before asking if they can actually pull it off. When she reminds him that they are both treated like useless NPCs at work, he realizes that it would only make the plan easier. With the branch in Alaska still almost a year from being open, she says they can probably just let the talk about their marriage lose any significance over time so they can eventually act like it never happened. After thinking about Kama, he decides to go all in on the plan, so she gives him a location to meet before work the next day so they can both break the news to Asako. She then tells him not to worry about any of the details around the marriage, as she is planning to be the one creating their fake love story and leaves him wondering why he hasn't seen that version of her throughout their years of working together. The next day, Asako gets the shock of her life when they tell her about the marriage and says she is proud of Takuya for finally finding enough balls to get a girl. She is still congratulating them when Kamiya asks to talk to her, so she wishes them luck and offers to give them marriage advice if they ever need it before leaving. He finds Asako's overexcitement for them a bit weird, but Rika tells him not to worry about it and promises to make sure their plan is a success. Later on, Shinshi freaks out after hearing that his latest clients have kicked the bucket while Takuya and Rika exchange weird glances at each other. The next moment, Asako gives him a job to do for one of their hotels and tells Rika to help him out before going to help Shinshi. When Takuya finishes up, he gives Asako a call and she tells him to bring it to a restaurant with Rika. At the restaurant moments later, they see that the entire branch has thrown a surprise party for them and start getting terrified. After they sit down and watch as everyone gets super excited for them, Rika tells him that they have to also show that they are excited to avoid looking suspicious. She then grabs 2 sake bottles and promises to handle everything before stepping out with her dark aura charging up. While everyone else drills him with questions about their love story, Kamiya, who is still shocked to hear that they are a thing, asks Asako if she ever suspected it. Asako then says she can smell something fishy, but guesses it is probably just one of the girls who didn't wash their plot properly. As Takuya struggles to keep up with all the questions, the lights suddenly go dim, and Rika comes back in after sending her liver to the ER. They all watch in shock as she sets up the karaoke machine and grabs a mic before spending the next couple of minutes making them regret ever showing up for the party. By the end of the day, Takuya tries to make sure she gets home in one piece until she falls into his chest and initiates the first form of contact between them in years. She immediately apologizes for it and quickly walks away, wishing she could take back all the stupid things she has done so far. Meanwhile, Takuya stands there, wondering why he didn't help her during her karaoke meltdown. With the next day being her day off, Rika spends it terrorizing the locals with her map before remembering when Takuya asked if she has any ideas for their fake love story. She gave him a form to put in his personal details and decides to use that information for the perfect meet-cute story to make their marriage believable. After taking pictures of different spots across the city, she goes to a cafe to read through his details and realizes that he is 2 years younger than her. She then creates a phantom version of him for a fake date in her mind, but she realizes that she has already forgotten what his face looks like. She then takes Smoke Takuya across town on a depression-inducing date and gets herself a stuffed pig to make it look a little less psychotic. Later on, she considers giving up, but then Takuya shows up and says he wants to help her come up with the story. By sundown, they get into a Ferris wheel together, so he asks if she likes riding it, but she says it is just a part of her plan. After a few awkward minutes of silence, she shows him the pictures she took across the city before pulling out the dollar store wedding rings she bought and saying they are an important part of their story. After putting hers on, she gives him the second one and tells him the story she has come up with before saying he has to come up with a proposal phrase before they get to the top of the wheel. She notices the shock on his face and says he doesn't have to do it, but he tells her it won't be a problem. Seconds later, he comes up with a phrase and she leans in to listen, but he chickens out and says he can't do it yet, so she tells him not to worry about it. After telling him about the view to lighten the mood, she talks about how their fake marriage has made her see that life outside of her maps isn't so bad. The following day, Takuya tries to get Kama under control but forgets about him to figure out why he was too spineless to pull off a fake proposal. He then tries to put on the ring she got to make their story believable, but even that becomes a problem for the chronically introverted loner. At the time, Riko has just gotten to a beach and excitedly takes a bunch of pictures to cook up more lies, but after seeing a real couple, she decides to turn it down a notch. As she tries to take a walk, a text comes in from an acquaintance, so she takes a moment to recharge her social battery before responding. Back at his place, Takuya keeps fighting the excessive amount of estrogen in his system and finally decides to put on the ring, causing him to experience a sense of freedom he never knew existed. After taking a look in the mirror, he decides to become the perfect fake husband for Riko, but he suddenly gets a call from a mysterious person claiming to know that their engagement is fake and promising to send them to Alaska. Outside the office later on, he tells Riko about it, and she figures that the person likely also works at the office before Gonda shows up and asks for a moment of their time. They get surprised by the sudden request, but agrees to hear him out, so he asks if he can come over to their apartment for a discussion after work, catching Takuya off guard. To avoid looking suspicious, they both claim to have no problem with it, so he thanks them and heads inside. At their workstations minutes later, they both start to think he is the mystery caller. After work, Takuya heads back home to explain the situation to Kama, but he keeps making a fuss over it, so Takuya promises extra treats and a whole week of not trying to eat him. Several minutes later, Riko shows up and asks if she is safe from Kama's claws, so he assures her there is nothing to worry about before taking her inside. The next moment, she shows him a bag filled with stuff for the apartment, and they immediately use it to make his place look less like a homeless shelter. After that, they set up pictures and work on making the origin story of their relationship a lot more believable before hearing the doorbell. Upon answering it together, they see that Gonda brought Itsuki and Kamiya as well. Moments later, they start knocking back glasses of booze and express their excitement over the engagement, but Riko begins to worry as they didn't prepare to have 3 people over. When he finally asks what Gonda wanted to talk about, Gonda begs for dating tips so he can also get married. Itsuki then explains how he has been on countless dating apps, stacking more rejections than the blubber building up in his face, and he gets embarrassed. While they look at the pictures Riko set up, Kamiya asks about when they first met, so he tells her they have been in love since their rookie year. Riko then invites them to have snacks with a clearly forced smile on her face, but they all get shocked because she usually acts like a Tesla bot wearing a human disguise. As the guys gradually lose their senses to the booze, Gonda asks Takuya for advice to take his Riz game to the next level, but Takuya forgets that he is meant to be playing the role of a happily married man and asks why they act like marriage is such a big deal when they simply just exchange rings and spend most of the rest of their lives traumatizing each other. Luckily, the drink stopped them from really understanding what he said, so they just keep laughing until dark. As Itsuki and Kamiya prepare to leave, Gonda tells Takuya that he plans to shoot his shot with Kamiya and asks for any support he can offer. After he leaves, Takuya goes back inside and gets startled because he completely forgot about Riko. While cleaning up the place, he asks why everyone is being so extra because of their engagement, so she explains that a lot of people really look forward to clapping one person for the rest of their life because it makes them happy. After telling her that coming home to relax with Kama is enough for him, he asks about her hobbies, so she tells him about her map addiction and gets overexcited while explaining it. She manages to stop herself and decides to head home, but on the way back, she gets worried that the fake engagement might lead to something else. At the office the following day, Takuya's dad, Koichi, shows up, and Riko tells him to get seated and wait to be attended to without realizing who he is. When she sees that everyone else is too busy to answer him, she decides to help him out, but after handing over his business card, he asks for Takuya because he didn't tell anyone in the family about the engagement. Upon realizing who she is talking to, she denies knowing anything about an engagement, so he apologizes for wasting her time and leaves her a gift from his cleaning company before leaving. Riko then tries to go tell Takuya, but sees that he isn't around, so she decides to go tell his dad the truth to avoid making the situation worse for him. Once outside, she sees him becoming a garage sale version of the Human Torch and offers to call Takuya before taking him to wait in a cafe. When she asks why Takuya's wedding is so important to him, he explains exactly what goes into a wedding back in their hometown and says his has to be perfect as he is the first son of the family. By then, Takuya, who just got back to the office, sees a text she left him and begins to panic. As Riko tries to figure out a way to fix everything, Takuya shows up and greets his dad, so she pulls him aside to explain everything in detail. He asks how he could have possibly found out, but she still hasn't figured out that part, so he promises to take care of it and thanks her for all the help. After getting seated, he tries to say the engagement is just a rumor, but his dad makes him stop and tells Riko that she doesn't have to sit there and put up with his stories any longer. She then tells him that she actually enjoyed hearing all about the grand wedding in their hometown, but he says he actually lied because those traditions have been dying out over the last few years. As he explains how their hometown has been losing its spark because of Gen Z's addiction to overpriced city life, Takuya tries to avoid the entire conversation, but Riko tells him to stop speaking of their hometown negatively because she still finds it extremely interesting. He gets shocked by that, so she tells him about reading it in an atlas, and he explains how nice life was back when Takuya was younger. After hearing that Takuya loved catching bullfrogs back then, she begins to wonder if there's more to him than being a four-eyed nerd while he keeps trying to avoid the entire conversation. Just then, his dad tells them that he heard about the engagement from people at the office and almost remembers Riko's name, but Takuya stops him and promises to travel down to their hometown to explain everything. After his dad leaves, Riko asks if he is really going to travel, so he tells her that he has to explain everything to his family and also take care of other personal issues. Later that day, Asako calls him aside to say that he has to serve as an attendant to a foreign princess who is currently visiting the country. As the princess plans on spending her last day touring as a regular civilian, she tells him to take care of it. But he asks why she isn't picking someone else. She then explains that the princess has a thing for foreign sausages despite being married, making him the perfect man for the job as he is engaged and will most likely keep his little Johnny under control while the others would yank out their meat sticks in an instant. After telling him that doing the job wrong will harm their agency, she leaves to tell the others, and they all get worried that he might not be able to handle such a huge responsibility. Later that day, he starts doing research on the princess in a nearby restaurant and begins to feel immense pressure as he now has to balance it with everything else. Just then, Riko spots him and considers helping but reminds herself that they are not close enough for that and leaves. The following day, he gets to the pickup spot and sees an entourage, so he waits, expecting to see the princess come out, but she sneaks up on him in the perfect NPC disguise. As she struggles to communicate with him in Japanese, he speaks in English to help her realize that Japan isn't still living in the Stone Age. As she prepares to start the tour, he asks if she would like him to call some of her guards, but she reminds him that the whole point of today is to experience civilian life. Realizing his mistake, he apologizes and asks if she already has plans, so she explains how she wants to experience something out of this world, making him realize that she doesn't have an idea of what she wants. Thankfully, he had already prepared a list of special locations, so they start by visiting a bunch of local temples, and she ends up loving all of them. At one point, he gets a call from Asako, who is currently freaking out because Claudia's entourage has been searching for her, but Takuya tells her not to worry and hangs up to keep an eye on her. After hours of trying out a bunch of different resorts and attractions, he decides to take her to an unconventional spot. Several minutes later, they get to a school rooftop, and she excitedly explains how she always wanted to see one after all her years of watching anime. To make it even better, he tells her about a uniform he prepared for her, and she immediately puts it on to take in the full experience. After dark, Gonda begins to wonder why Takuya isn't back yet, so Itsuki reminds him of Claudia's addiction to foreign sausages and says they probably finished the tour with a cream pie. Gonda then tells him to stop making such jokes around Riko, who then tries to act like she isn't fazed while secretly Googling everything she can about Claudia. By then, Takuya has just told Claudia that they need to head back, so she takes a moment to thank him for making the day special before asking to be taken back to his apartment. A little while after that, Riko gets to his apartment building to drop something off in his mail, but after seeing that it's too big to fit, she uses that as an opportunity to see if he is around. As she gets close to his door, she hears Claudia making suspicious sounds and quickly takes a peep before deciding that it's none of her business. She still ends up beside his window and tries to figure out what she is doing in his place with a school uniform. Just then, Claudia spots her and tells Takuya, but after sliding the window open and not seeing anyone, he tells her that it was probably just someone passing by. As Riko tries to crawl away, Claudia gets curious about the room where he keeps Kama, so she opens it and almost loses her face to his claws. As they both crash to the ground, Riko barges in and thinks Takuya is a kitty-addicted creep who hides behind his nerd disguise. After she tells him to stop letting chicks into his place for the sake of maintaining their story, Claudia excitedly expresses how eager she has been to finally meet her. Moments later, Takuya explains that he had actually been texting her to come over, and she gets embarrassed for jumping to conclusions. Claudia then tells her that he had initially refused to bring her home because of their engagement but changed his mind when she started asking to see her. Once again, Riko gets embarrassed for not understanding the situation, and seeing them act so awkwardly causes Claudia to get emotional, so she tells them about her plan to leave the royal family to pursue her one true love. Surprised, Takuya asks if it's her current husband, but she shows him a picture of her girlfriend, Marie, and explains how they fell in love long before her marriage. She further explains that her current marriage was only to appease her country, and thanks them for showing her what it means to actually be in love with someone. After she gets picked up for her flight back home, Riko apologizes to Takuya once again, but he tells her not to worry and asks why she came over since she never saw the texts he sent. She then gives him a frog-shaped rock to remind him of his childhood addiction to catching frogs and runs off. The following day, Takuya enters Super Saiyan mode to groom Kama, but he continues receiving text messages from his sister about the engagement to Riko and tries to figure out how to break the bad news to his family over the weekend. He then spots the frog rock Riko gave him and almost believes what Claudia said about them being the perfect couple, but quickly shakes the thought out of his head to focus on the mission at hand. At the office the following day, making eye contact with Riko suddenly becomes an impossible task as they both try to avoid dealing with the obvious tension from the other night. Just then, Gonda asks Takuya about his trip back to his hometown, as it's only a day away. While they all joke about how he is finally planning to have the talk with his parents, Riko wonders how they all already know about it. All the brainstorming begins to affect Riko's work until Takuya tells Gonda and the others that he is only going back to handle boring business with his family. He then walks over to Riko and promises to stick to the plan when he sees his family. But then she gets a call from the mystery stalker. They tell her to follow him on the trip since they claim to be a married couple and also promise to keep a close watch before hanging up the phone. Later that day, Takuya takes Kama to a pet daycare and leaves him in the care of Senmori before drifting off into flow state to carefully plan the trip to his family home. He decides on a plan to make his family support the lie and keep it from anyone at work, but knows they won't be able to return on the same day, so he decides to get a hotel to avoid any questions since everyone else believes they will both be with his parents planning a wedding. After paying for Kama, he leaves to pack up, and Riko, who has been staring at a map of his hometown, also tries to pick an outfit for the trip. She then remembers how she would always struggle to pick an outfit until her mom told her to be a little more confident in herself and decides to take that advice for once. At the airport the following day, Takuya gets worried as it is almost past boarding time, but that all fades away when Riko shows up looking like a wannabe Disney princess. Minutes later, their plane takes off, and he realizes that the occasional glance to see her hot face might start feeling weird, so he asks if she has ever been to the city where his hometown is located. When she says yes, he asks if it was for a family trip but instantly regrets the question, thinking he is overstepping. She then offers to tell him a little about her family since they have mostly been talking about him, and he agrees to listen. She explains how she was mostly home alone because her dad never came back from getting milk, while her mom constantly traveled all over the world for business. Being home alone all the time led her to develop a love for maps, as that was the only way she felt connected to the places her mom traveled to. There was a family friend who would occasionally call to check in, but Riko always claimed to be perfectly okay and kept playing with her maps until she began daydreaming about visiting a bunch of cities with her mom. Minutes later, they land at the airport and wish each other luck before he sees his grandmother holding a box of melons. After saying that she came to drop it off for sales, she offers to give them a ride back to her home. In the van moments later, she asks if Riko is the chick everyone at home said he is getting married to, so they decide to come clean and admit that it was all a lie. Once back home, she takes them in to greet his grandfather, who can barely stand anymore, before telling Takuya to help box some melons while she takes Riko to get more from the garden. After minutes of plucking melons with Riko and admiring the landscape, Takuya's granny takes her aside to offer her a slice and claims to know that they are actually getting married. Riko immediately assures her that they are not, but she tells her to stop the cap and explains how the look on Takuya's face when they first showed up told her everything she needed to know about their relationship. Riko then tries to explain their story in detail, but she gets knocked out by a heat stroke, so Granny calls out to Takuya and runs in to call a doctor. Takuya then decides to carry her inside, but the lack of testosterone immediately catches up to him, nearly causing his spine to snap in two. Just as his granny opens the door so he can take her inside, his dad shows up and immediately grabs on to help. While carrying her inside, he tells Takuya that everyone has been waiting at the main family house and asks why Riko came with him before realizing that she is the wife he is allegedly getting married to. He begins asking a bunch of questions, so Takuya tells him that there is no wedding and apologizes for lying to him. Pissed off, he asks why they didn't just say the truth the other day at the cafe and tells him to grow a pair because he has always found it difficult to take care of his problems on time. Minutes after arguing about it, they set her down for the doctor to take a look, and he tells them not to worry because Riko just needs to rest, so Granny offers to walk him out. Takuya then promises to apologize to everyone back home for his lies, but his dad tells him to focus on living life like a real man instead of a spineless femboy who can't stand his ground. As he tries to start another argument, Granny comes in to apologize for making Riko work, but they tell her not to blame herself, and Takuya says she probably just needs time to adjust to their weather. Hours later, he makes it to his parents' place and explains everything to his mom and sisters. Unlike his dad, they take the news a little better and get excited to know how he got into such a complicated situation. Before leaving for his granny's place, his mom tells him to take care of Rika and promises to get his dad to chill out before his sisters hand over some gifts for her. At his grandparents' place minutes later, Granny tells him to head up to his room because Rika is still asleep, so he thanks her for all the help before climbing up the stairs and getting shocked when he sees that she kept Rika in his room. He immediately tries to drag his futon out, but Rika finally wakes up, causing him to freak out. After promising that he didn't do anything freaky with her, he explains how she passed out and everything that happened afterward. He also tells her about the talk with his mom and sisters, but she starts feeling bad for not joining him and asks if they can go again. Just then, they hear a lot of frogs croaking, and she asks if they can go outside, so he takes her out, and they spend a few minutes talking before a frog latches onto her head. She panics and nearly trips, but he holds her up and catches the frog before explaining which species it is. On the way down to the fields, she recognizes his touch from earlier and asks if he is the one that carried her, so he explains how his dad had to help because of his twig-sized arms. She then apologizes for the inconvenience it must have caused them and says she probably got overwhelmed by how different life is in his hometown. After she tells him how exciting the experience has been, even if she slept through most of it, he reminds her of the frog stone she gave him and says it really means a lot, as he never gets gifts like that. He then tries to say something about how going on the trip with her makes him feel, but the frogs interrupt, so he suggests heading back inside and promises to take out his futon. The next morning, she gets lost in thought as she tries to figure out what he was trying to say. After Granny tells her to get ready for breakfast, she heads into the washroom to clean up, and Takuya also comes out to check on her again. Seeing his flawless skin causes a different part of her body to get soaked, so she asks for some privacy and he apologizes for barging in. Later that morning, they thank Granny for breakfast, and she promises to send some melons over for Rika before they start heading to his parents' place. On the way there, she gets lost in how good his hair looks and decides to walk ahead of him, but he stops her because she starts going the wrong way. Minutes later, they get there, and the ladies immediately flood Rika with tons of questions, while Takuya watches and prays they don't traumatize her. After the interrogation, they tell him to give her a tour of the city, but she asks for their dad so she can apologize first. Takuya's mom then tells her not to bother because he already left for work and is most likely too embarrassed to talk to her. When his sister asks if there is anywhere in their city worth visiting, Rika suddenly gets hyped about the city's volcanic museum. Minutes later, she and Takuya set out for the museum, and she apologizes for coming off as pushy, but he tells her not to worry and starts a conversation about it. The whole time, she continues obsessing over his hair until the radio plays a song that reminds her of the Discovery Channel she watched years ago. As her trip down memory lane transitions to complete delusion, Takuya continues trying to bring her back until they get to the museum. They then spend most of the day seeing a bunch of attractions and watching several documentaries on the city's volcanic history. After going out to see what used to be twin volcanoes, they try to head back inside, but a school trip suddenly gets out of control as the students run across the museum, troubling other visitors. After one of them bumps into Rika, Takuya activates dad mode and reminds Rika of their rookie training for handling similar situations. To keep the little criminals entertained, they both tell them a folktale about the volcanoes and end up being the tour guides for the rest of the day. Afterward, they say goodbye and get back into the car, but Takuya decides to get his sister to take them to the airport so they can both rest for a bit before boarding the flight back home. When they eventually get back to his parents' place, he tries to go call his sister and gets shocked upon seeing an old baddie friend named Now. When his mom and sisters come out, Now shows them the new batch of glass plates she just finished making, and Takuya gets surprised again as he didn't know she had any talent. Rika then comes out to see what all the noise is about, so Takuya introduces them to each other and teases Now for trying to act civilized. Now immediately starts roughing up his hair, and he does the exact same thing to her, causing Rika to think she will never get to that level of closeness with him. Just then, Now asks Rika if they can be friends, and says she plans to attend a workshop close to their office in Tokyo. While feeding Kama a snack just a few days later, Takuya begins to wonder why Rika suddenly turned cold during the flight back to Tokyo. He first thinks it had something to do with his family, but after remembering how she seemed cool with them, he thanks the god for stopping him from explaining how he really felt when they were together in the fields. Meanwhile, Rika, who is currently watching a travel documentary, thinks back on how close they got on the trip, but also remembers the way Now played with his hair and decides to shut off her emotions to avoid feeling anything for him. At the office the following day, Asako reminds them that it's almost time for the summer fair, which means they all need to get hyper-focused on selling more tickets to travelers. After the meeting, Shinshi starts a chant to neutralize any negative aura that might affect their ticket sales, and Asako forces them all to join in. At lunchtime, Shinshi opens up a perfect lunch made by his wife and aggressively glazes her, while everyone else hopes they get a partner with half his wife's talent. Hours after clocking out, Takuya ends up at a bar with Gonda and gets upset because he wants to go back home to Kama, but Gonda begs him to stay and offers some advice so Takuya can start giving him some attention. Instead of telling Gonda to drop the beer and lose his love handles, Takuya focuses on his relationship with Rika and keeps trying to understand why she won't even look in his direction. The following day, the entire office spirals into chaos as most of the agency's clients continue calling to ask for their tickets because Shinshi hasn't sent them out. When Asako comes out to find him, Takuya uses that opportunity to speak to Rika, but she completely ignores him, which causes his fears to triple as he begins to think she completely hates him. The next moment, a boy named Hideo walks in, claiming to be Shinshi's son, and asks if he has shown up to the office. Takuya then asks what happened when he last saw Shinshi, so Hideo explains how he got into a fight with his wife over her demand for a divorce and hasn't returned home ever since. They all begin coming up with theories that might have led to the divorce, but then George gets pissed at them for gossiping about it, while Hideo is still clearly worried about his dad's safety. He then tells Takuya to help him find Shinshi and promises to handle any work he has left in the meantime. Minutes later, Takuya begins to wonder how Shinshi's seemingly perfect marriage is suddenly ending and hopes he will be able to at least find him to give Hideo peace. Just then, Hideo shows him a file of business cards his dad keeps and says they might be clues to the kind of places he usually visits. Takuya then becomes determined to help the little detective, but after hours of visiting countless businesses, Hideo stops and asks if they will actually be able to find Shinshi. Hoping to cheer him up, Takuya takes him into a fast food restaurant for a break, but after taking a bite out of the burger, Hideo tells him that their family was perfect until his mom decided to go back to the streets. As he starts crying, Takuya pulls his seat beside him to offer some comfort and thinks back to what his dad said about him not giving his all to anything he does. After another couple of hours of searching, he calls Asako to tell her that they still haven't found him, but then George grabs the phone and gives him directions to a bar for depressed dudes. Minutes later, they get to the block George described, but Takuya wonders how he is supposed to find a bar for depressed dudes until he sees one literally leaking out bad vibes. Just then, Takuya and the others catch up to help him look, so he tells Takuya to watch Hideo just in case Shinshi is tweaking off the henny. Once he gets inside with Gonda and Itsuki, they spot Shinshi at the counter and go over to check on him. Upon seeing them, he apologizes for being late to work and says he will be there as soon as he is done erasing the printed out divorce papers. Unfortunately, the alcohol begins to wear off, causing him to realize that his perfect marriage is really about to end. Immediately after dropping his head on the counter, he takes off running right before George shows up, so they all split up to find him. While Takuya struggles to keep up with Hideo, Takuya and the others eventually find Shinshi in a tree, reverting to his pre-evolution state. As he takes off running again, they chase after him for a couple of laps and end up taking a break to catch their breaths and brainstorm ideas for stopping a heartbroken psychopath. Meanwhile, Rika shows up to stop Hideo, but his tears remind her of the time her parents also started fighting, so she promises to be there for him until the boys get Shinshi back. Moments later, he starts heading straight for George, who then gets into a stance and punches the insanity right out of his head. When Takuya catches up and asks if he is ready to go back home, he tells him that facing the truth is still too hard for him. Moments later, Hideo sees them bringing him back and runs into his arms while bawling his eyes out. Shinshi then agrees to head home with him, but the others continue wondering how such a perfect family got ruined. The following day, Asako gets hyped about a display contest, but notices that she is the only one in a good mood, so she asks why. After reminding her that they chased down a full-grown man who thought he had become a gorilla, Itsuki tells them that Shinshi took the day off to focus on his family. Once again, they start coming up with theories about what happened and call his wife insensitive for bringing up the divorce on their anniversary, but then George says that there was probably a lot she had to put up with. He further explains that Shinshi probably didn't see her struggles as he was too fixated on having the perfect marriage and never realized that his happiness wasn't enough for the both of them. As everyone starts sharing their thoughts on what marriage actually looks like, Itsuki tells Takuya to be careful with his, but Gonda stops him from saying anything else. On the way to the storage room, Takuya plays back how the once cheerful Shinshi became an overnight vodka addict and wonders if marriage is really worth all the emotional stress it brings. Upon getting to the storage room, he sees someone struggling with a box and runs in to help before seeing that it's Riko. She gives him the same cold expression, but he still decides to help her get the box out. When she suddenly expresses her hopes for Shinshi to fix his marriage, Takuya gets confused as he can't figure out a response, so he decides to stay silent. On the way home that evening, Riko also starts to worry about their relationship and tries using the memories of her past to shut out the emotions, but then now shows up and asks for her help. After now explains how confused she has been after getting to the city, Riko asks for her address to help out and gets shocked because Nao's apartment building is right beside hers. Now also gets excited to be living beside her and hands over a card to the workshop she will be working at so Riko can stop by any time she wants. At work the following day, Takuya tries to start up a conversation, but Riko barely responds to him as usual, so he leaves. On her way home after work, she takes a look at the card Nao gave her and thinks back to the way she was messing with Takuya before deciding to find the workshop to learn more about her. Minutes later, she finds the place and gets in just in time to watch Nao demonstrate her skills to the midget Karen running the workshop. After several minutes of playing with fire, she finally makes a perfect glass cup, but the teacher tells her to do better. Riko then tries to head home, but Nao spots her and runs out to express the usual overexcitement. When she asks why Riko didn't just call her, she says she didn't want to interrupt, so Nao suggests having a drinking party at her place so they can really talk. Riko immediately tries to shut it down, but Nao presses even harder and says it will be the perfect bonding exercise, so Riko ends up accepting. After dark, Nao shows up at her place with snacks from back home and explains how coincidental it was that they met each other on her very first day in the city. To celebrate it, she pulls out over a dozen cans of beer, causing Riko to wonder how Takuya didn't end up being an alcoholic despite growing up with someone like her. After pointing out the fact that her cup of beer is made from stones, Nao explains how she spent her early years playing Dora the Explorer before learning that she could turn rocks into beautiful glassware. Riko then commends her on being so talented, but she says her teacher back home still treats her like a useless newbie, which is why she needs the workshop to get better. To change the topic, she asks Riko if anything happened recently that made her upset. After giving it some thought, Riko tells her about a map she bought that was folded and claims to not be the type to hold onto stuff that pissed her off. That all changes after another can of beer causes her to trauma dump on Nao until she asks about the fake relationship situation with Takuya. Riko easily admits that it was all a lie, but when Nao asks if there is really nothing between them, she suddenly gets intense and says she is dying to know what he thinks of their situation. After falling on the table to stop herself from saying something that might reveal her feelings, she asks Nao if Takuya has always been so hard to read. Nao then tells her about the day he followed her to her best spot in the woods and spent the day playing until dark. Upon realizing that she could not find her way back home, she got upset, but he cheered her up with a firefly and managed to find a way back safely. After saying that the current Takuya acts so different from who he was, Riko acts like she doesn't really care anymore, but then Nao suggests asking him for an explanation since she wants to know what he really thinks. Before Riko can understand what she is trying to say, she gets up and gives Takuya a call, demanding that he show up to talk with Riko before passing out. Minutes later, Takuya shows up and immediately sees that Riko has completely lost her mind to the booze. Once inside, he tries to wake Nao up, but Riko tells him to leave her and says she would like to talk. She proceeds to ask what he wanted to say that night in the fields, but he acts like he can't remember any of that. As she continues demanding to know what it was, with a serious look on her face, he claims he was just happy to have taken a walk with her. She then takes another sip of beer, and he asks if she has been upset with him since the trip. When she admits to just struggling with communication, he explains how transitioning into adulthood made it hard for him to be the same as he began to learn how confusing the real world could be. After saying that she had to turn off her emotions to endure the bad parts of growing up, she tells him that her off switch no longer works because she just can't understand what he wants. She then demands to know if they are just co-conspirators, so he takes a moment to think before saying,
俺と付き合ってください.
The next moment, they both spiral into a mental breakdown as she struggles to accept that he just popped the question while he wonders how his intrusive thoughts slipped out so easily. After a few minutes, she thinks back to her completely boring life in school and realizes that she doesn't know the first thing about love. This causes her to get even more confused about the right way to respond while he continues to panic and thinks she is looking for an easy way to say no. After another couple of minutes of silent mental episodes, he pulls himself up and carries now out, finally giving Riko space to breathe and process her thoughts while he deeply regrets ever opening his mouth. The next day, Rika wakes up with the alcohol finally out of her system and realizes that she now has to face Takuya at work after what happened. As she tries to get ready, her body begins playing more tunes than a rusty sewer pipe. After managing to get to the office despite the nasty hangover, she sees that Takuya has the day off and feels relieved. Just then, Shinshi walks in, looking like he got possessed by the ghost of a K-pop fanatic. As Riko considers giving Takuya a call, he becomes fully immersed in his new identity as a vegetable and keeps wondering what he did to make her react that way until Kama gives him the death stare for not putting out some food. Too heartbroken to care, Takuya continues losing his mind until someone rings the doorbell. He desperately wishes that it is Riko, wanting to accept his proposal and apologize for last night, but it ends up being Gonda. As Gonda apologizes for showing up on his day off and asks for help, Takuya tells him to give up on Kamiya. But then Gonda says it has nothing to do with her and shows him a dating app. He further claims to have become a master of baddies, but admits that he is still too shy to meet up with one of them, which is why he showed up. At a restaurant later that morning, Takuya gets shocked by how good he looks in a photo and how much he spent to make his dating profile appealing to the ladies. After justifying the insane amount of money he spent by claiming everyone else does the same, Takuya asks what happened to his love for Kamiya. Gonda then explains how she still barely notices him and says he wants to get a wife while he still looks a little good because no one will be interested in a middle-aged human avocado who still makes barely above minimum wage. When Takuya asks what exactly he needs help with, Gonda shows him all the ladies on the app that rejected him and says he tried settling for chicks on his level but was mostly scared for his life because they all seem a little insane. The next moment he pulls out a coat and says it's from an idol group he loves. He further explains how he found a fan group on the app and met a chick who decided to spend the day having their own little convention. After showing him a picture of the chick, Gonda asks Takuya to stay on the lookout and save him if she turns out to be another lunatic. Moments later, Takuya watches him waiting and wonders if he will have to go to such lengths just to get some kitty. Just then, the chick shows up, and they introduce themselves with their idol group's theme song before she takes off the mask and leaves him stunned by her beauty. When he asks why she hides her face, she reminds him that a lot of creeps also use the app to find victims and expresses how happy she is to finally meet a fellow fanatic. As they start heading inside, Takuya decides to leave to avoid being the third wheel. After spending the rest of the day trying out different spots while continuously glazing their idol group, Kaori finally remembers that she is an adult and says she has to leave to finish up some work. Gonda then tries to ask if she wants to meet up again, but she asks for his number so they can talk over the phone. He immediately gives it to her and collects hers as well before heading home to watch the idol group perform so they can have a lot to talk about. While cleaning the office days later, Takuya sees that it's Riko's day off right before Gonda starts yapping about how he and Kaori can't get enough of each other. The next moment, he says he can't wait to marry her, so Takuya decides to go out with him for drinks after work to discuss it. As Gonda continues insisting that he wants to marry her as soon as possible, Takuya gets curious and asks why he wants to get married so badly. Gonda then explains how sad life was growing up in poverty with his parents, who would always fight because of the debts his dad was in. Thanks to his older brother, he had some semblance of a normal life, but struggled to keep up with his peers later on because all his brain could think of was food. After he shares his dream to marry a loving wife and have kids that he will treat in the best way possible, Takuya asks how he so easily says the corniest stuff. Gonda then admits to the fact that guys like him don't seem like the type to ever achieve such things, but Takuya interrupts and tells him to do whatever makes him happy. Minutes later, he gets Kaori to meet up with him and asks if she would be down to date to see if they would be compatible for marriage, but her mood suddenly changes. She then makes him follow her onto a bus and takes him to a daycare to pick up her son. Upon seeing the stunned look on his face, she asks if he still wants to date and tells him not to worry, it's too much to handle. The following day, he meets up with Takuya to talk about how he doesn't really care that someone else already ran through her cat, so Takuya tells him to follow his heart. He then heads to the bank to get a good understanding of his finances before deciding to reach out to Kaori again. After work, he texts her asking to meet up at a restaurant, but after hours of waiting, a friend of hers shows up and says Kaori wants him to forget about her. She tries to explain how hard it is for single moms to commit to new relationships, but then she sees the notes from his bank and realizes what he tried to do. Later that night, he meets up with Takuya and decides to give up on getting married because his reaction to Kaori's truth made him realize that he is just not ready for it. As he breaks down in tears, Takuya realizes that he doesn't even have the balls to be that committed to someone. After work the following day, Rika tries to call Takuya, but her insecurities stop her from pressing the dial button as she keeps thinking about how direct he was with the proposal. Minutes later, she starts heading home, but now runs up to her outside the building and hands over a gift to apologize for passing out the other night. When Riko asks what she remembers, Now says everything after the third can of beer has been a blur and asks if she did anything embarrassing. Riko then completely ignores her question and begins explaining how she has always struggled to make decisions for herself. To help her, Now suggests joining her for a free glassmaking class and swears that playing around with 1,000 degrees will permanently fix all her problems. The following day, she shows up at the workshop and meets Nao's mentor, who turns out to be a really chill dude. After Nao shows her some of their latest work, Hochi leaves so they can have the studio to themselves. Nao then explains how to get started and tells her to be careful of the furnace before cooking up a new mold. Moments later, she guides Riko on the perfect technique for blowing.
Hi.
As she takes a water break, Nao puts it back in the furnace for a couple of minutes before explaining how to make the base. After a few minutes of making sure Riko sticks to the correct rhythm, she takes it back for the finishing touch. Just then, Hoshi gets back with a bottle of water for her, and they both watch as Nao finishes up the cup with a lot more skill than when she first started. While looking at all the other cups she has made, Riko begins to understand how good it feels to fully commit to something and thinks back to the conversation she had with Takuya about always shutting off her emotions. When Nao finally finishes with the cup, Riko asks if it's meant to be hideous, but both Nao and Hochi tell her not to expect greatness when she only just learned how to blow the pipe. Nao then escorts her out and promises to deliver the cup to her apartment after it cools. On the way home, she thinks of what to do with the glass, but then a text comes in from a certain someone asking if they can meet up over the weekend. Early that Saturday morning, Riko quickly gets herself ready for the meetup, but after shutting the door, she trips and fixes up her heel without realizing that Takuya is calling her. At a cafe minutes later, she orders a coffee and struggles to get her emotions in check before her mom shows up. After she talks about how nice the cafe is, Riko asks about the shopping bags, so she explains how she always had to bribe her leads with the most expensive stuff on the market just to make sure she lands every single deal. She then asks Riko how work has been and suggests becoming a freelance agent instead of working under Asako and making just enough to avoid becoming homeless. When Riko says she likes working at the agency, her mom gets excited to know that she has clearly thought about it, but still reminds her that she can achieve anything she wants if she puts her mind to it. As she decides to take a break from chatting to take pictures for work, Riko admires how dedicated she is to achieving the most out of life and wonders why she didn't get the same drive. All of a sudden, her mom asks if she is ready for marriage, but Riko says she hasn't even thought about that yet, after saying that she wants her to find the best partner so she won't end up drowning herself in work to avoid the loneliness. Her mom asks to be introduced to her Prince Charming whenever she finds him. At the time, Takuya, who is calling her again, gets disappointed and wonders why she has been avoiding a simple conversation ever since he asked her out. As he drops the phone and decides to stop reaching out, a call comes in, and he immediately answers, but it's just the vet lady who wants to talk about Kama's immunization. Minutes later, Riko's mom reminds her to always believe in herself and immediately gets on the phone with someone to ask if the rumors of Riko getting married are actually true. Just then, Riko finally sees the missed calls from Takuya and initially panics, but then she starts to wonder what he even sees in her that makes him so interested. While on the train heading home, she thinks back to the time a guy first asked her out and how she spent 3 days avoiding his calls and texts because she was too scared and indecisive to make up her mind. When she eventually went to school, he was absent because of a sickness he got while waiting for her in the intense heat. After fully accepting that she has never been the type to have guys flooding her DMs, she gets frustrated trying to figure out why Takuya wants to date her. Minutes later, she gets to his place, and he gets shocked seeing her, but she immediately demands to go on a date with him. Upon seeing that he is still struggling to get the words out of his mouth, she tells him to expect a text about the date and turns to leave. After coming back in to apologize for not answering his calls, she starts heading home. Several days later, he makes it to the station she mentioned in a text and makes his way into the small town to find the spot she asked to meet up. Once at the location, he wonders if the sudden demand for a date is her way of responding to the proposal. Just then, she finally shows up and asks why he wore leather shoes because they are going to be walking around for most of the day. She then explains her intentions to act as a tour guide and says he can leave whenever he wants, causing him to get a lot more confused while she becomes determined to make him bored to the point where he realizes that he doesn't actually want her. As she leads the tour, he continues trying to understand why she suddenly asked for a date and now looks pissed that he showed up. After reading about the waterway, he asks why she wants to do a tour of it, so she reminds him of the travel documentary channel she loves and explains how she usually visits any spot they review on her days off. When he remembers watching the episode where they visited the waterway and tells her, she yaps about how she loves spending time in places like this and expects him to get bored. Instead, he admits to being impressed because he never considered visiting the places in the show. The shock from hearing that statement nearly makes her suck the life out of his perfect face, but she gets her demons under control to continue the tour. As the day progresses, she notices him simply watching everything she does and becomes convinced that he is starting to get tired of it, but he keeps getting fascinated by how committed she is to it. At a certain point, he suggests taking a break to get some food, but she pulls out a snack and shares it with him before continuing the tour. Minutes later, she completely forgets that Takuya even exists and becomes fully immersed in the tour to the point where she begins visualizing what life used to be like before all the technology. When Takuya eventually says something, she gets startled, so he explains how Google had been helping him keep up with her. She then says he doesn't have to act like he actually enjoys watching her, but he says he has always wanted to see her excited about something and expresses how happy he is to spend the whole day doing just that. After a moment of silence to get her words together, she asks if he is actually normal because there is no way he finds her idea of a date fun, but before he can give her a response, she tells him that they have to stop the marriage act because she gets confused whenever they are together. She also promises to accept the transfer to Alaska, so he accepts, but then she begins to feel sad as the reality of what she just said catches up to her. Upon seeing the look on her face, Takuya remembers how Gonda risked his heart for a chance at true love and decides to put his foot down. As he grabs her arm, after seconds of exchanging mouth juices, they pull back and he tries to say something, but she stops him from talking to focus on the explosions going off in her mind. She then tells him that they need time to reevaluate their relationship because it makes no sense how they went from planning a fake marriage to escape getting transferred to now making out with each other after the most bizarre date known to man. He admits that she is right about how fast and complicated their relationship seems, so she grabs her hat and starts heading home to think but stops to promise that she is not upset before leaving. While he stays back and wonders how she was so calm about everything, she finally makes it back home and completely goes insane. She then tries stacking rocks to calm herself, but the memory of their kiss sends her spiraling out of control again. Later that night, Asako receives a rather suspicious call concerning the lovebirds. The next day, they both get to the office at the same time and completely forget how to exchange a simple greeting. Thankfully, Gonda shows up with the usual cheerful attitude, and that distracts them until they get to their desks and struggle to stop thinking about the loss while working. The next moment, Asako comes in and asks to speak with both of them about an important matter. Minutes later, she tells them about a project for new recruits and says they basically have to document their life together as a couple so the new hires can see that the agency supports love among coworkers. Upon seeing the shock on their faces, she tells them not to worry about adding the freaky aspects of their marriage and says they just have to make sure the project captures the romance. After work, they get a table at the cafe, and Rika asks why Asako would suddenly come up with something so random. After saying that it might be a trap to see if they are actually married or not, Takuya reminds her of the phone calls they've been getting, causing Rika to realize that they might be in more trouble than they initially thought. After she says this would be the perfect time to come out and confess to everyone, he remembers when she promised to take the assignment to Alaska. He then refuses to let her go and says they should just make do with the project, but then she reminds him that they actually have to live together to pull it off, since that is what led Asako to give them the project in the first place. She further explains that it will have to be at his place, which means they also need to make sure Kama will be okay with it. After he agrees, she asks for some time to think it through so she doesn't make any sudden moves they might regret. Later that week, she decides to hike to a famous rock formation and uses that as inspiration to make up her mind on whether or not to stay at Takuya's place. She then remembers the night he asked her out and realizes that she has to make a decision fast because he has already made his intentions clear. Hours later, Takuya begins to worry about the plan because it's been 5 days since she asked for time, but then he hears the doorbell and sees her outside. After expressing her determination to see it through, she hands over a copy of the rule book she made to make sure they can easily understand each other despite both being bad at communicating. Once he makes sure that Kama won't attack her, they both get seated inside, and he becomes curious about the rules saying he had to raise his hand before taking any action. To demonstrate, she asks for permission by raising hers and explains how it's the best way to avoid something spontaneous like the makeout session they had the other day. They then discuss how to take care of Kama and handle the basic chores before she asks if he wants to split the bills. After raising their hands countless times just to make a suggestion, Takuya convinces her to let him handle the bills, but suggests dropping the raising of hands until it's necessary. For the next agenda, she pulls out a tent and says she will be using that to make sure Kama doesn't get troubled. After she sets it up beside his bed, he asks if she has any ideas for dinner, so she tries to come up with something, but he tells her not to worry and leaves to get groceries. Just as she tries to work on something else, Kama sneaks up behind her, so she freezes on the spot to avoid getting her back clawed out. She then begins promising to make sure they keep his best interest at heart while working on the project, so Kama rubs up against her foot before heading back into his favorite room. Minutes later, Takuya comes back home and asks if she would like to share it after he cooks, but her reaction shocks him. While she thinks accepting the offer will cause them to forget about boundaries and start sucking faces, he thinks she probably doesn't like the idea of sharing food with him. When he says she doesn't have to eat with him, she apologizes for taking too long to respond and thanks him for the offer. Barely a couple of moments later, he whips up a Michelin-star dinner and explains that he meal preps a lot, but then she suddenly gets up to open the window. As she prays that he doesn't notice how sweaty she is after staying in the hot tent, he fears that she might be disgusted by the smell of his apartment. After taking one bite of the food, she immediately compliments his cooking and asks how he makes it so tasty. So he brings out a bunch of spices and explains how he loves collecting them whenever he travels. She then asks where the chili came from, but when he tells her, she realizes that they are getting too close and moves back to reinstate their boundaries. Once they finish with dinner, she decides to help out with the dishes, but realizes that she now has to clean up in his bathroom. Just as he asks if she needs help with the dishes, she claims to have left something at her place and leaves, giving him time to finally take a leak. After brushing her teeth a couple of minutes later, she starts heading back to his place and tries to create a new plan to include her bathroom breaks. Upon getting there, he asks if she thought about how to take a bath, but she freaks out as the thought of stripping when he's right next door becomes too much for her mind to handle. Once he realizes that the question is causing her a lot of mental stress, he apologizes and swears that he won't try to spy on her milk jugs before suggesting using a public bath instead. As she heads out, he runs after her to join, so she decides to go buy stuff they will probably need. After stopping by the convenience store, they get to the bathhouse, and she tells him not to worry about waiting if he finishes before her. She then proceeds to spend almost half an hour soaking up her melons with the hope that he will get tired of waiting and head home without her. When she finally dries off and prepares to head home alone, she finds him waiting and struggles to hide how good it makes her feel. While walking back, he also starts paying extra attention to how good she looks until their arms bump into each other. Once back home, they both start a staring contest to see who has enough courage to clap, but they both end up being spineless virgins and get into bed. As he stays up to get himself bricked by thinking about what could have happened, she does the same but slowly starts to realize that a heat-trapping tent might have been a bad idea. He then pulls out his phone to send her a text asking about the kind of relationship they have, but after changing his mind at the last moment, she texts him asking if he is still awake. He immediately responds to it, but then they both get confused trying to figure out what the other wants to do. After minutes of calculating endless possibilities, they both send the same text asking if they are troubling each other and end up thinking it might be best to stay up together. The next moment, Rika torpedoes out of the tent and explains that the heat is killing her, so he suggests cooling off on the balcony. While standing there, he realizes that adult romance is extremely complicated and wonders if their relationship might be better if they were actually married. At the office just a few days later, the pretend couple turns in the first presentation of the project, and Asako falls in love with how good they look together, so she asks when they plan to get married. After saying it's just a joke to stop them from feeling the pressure, she tells them to continue the project and leaves. Takuya then thinks back to the marriage idea he came up with the other night and watches Rika closely for some sort of sign that she feels the same. Minutes later, Asako meets up with Mamoru to tell him that they are definitely not faking the engagement, so Mamoru reminds her that the suspicions came from someone in the head office before selecting someone else to lead the branch they plan to open in Alaska. When she asks why the sacrificial lamb has to come from their branch, he reminds her that they have the most employees. Moments later, everyone in the office tells Gonda that he will be the one sent down to Alaska, and he completely loses it, so they explain that it's still just a rumor that hasn't been approved by the head office. While they try to console him, Takuya starts to realize that their fake engagement plan can only be successful if someone else gets sent away. After remembering everything Gonda has been through in his pursuit of love, he spends the rest of the day brooding over it. While in bed later that night, he ponders how everyone at the office has an entire life ahead of them and makes a decision to end it all. The next day, he stops Asako in the office to tell her the entire truth, but he first thinks back to a certain day many years ago when he visited a pool on a free swimming day. Upon seeing a fried squid truck, he thought about how his mom specifically told him not to buy food but still used it to get himself a hot snack. When his mom saw him later on, he lied about using the money to swim, but she saw the squid crumbs on his face and took him back home to scold him for disobeying her and lying instead of admitting what he did. After his dad also pulled him aside to ask why he had to lie, he broke down in tears and couldn't stop feeling ashamed of himself. Realizing that he is still doing the same thing despite being a full-grown adult, he apologizes to Asako for lying and admits that the whole engagement thing was a lie to avoid getting sent to Alaska. He further accepts any punishment she sees fit and asks to be sent to Alaska instead of anyone else. After hearing him out, Asako takes him into the storage closet to see Rika, who had apparently also confessed the entire thing to her earlier on. As they both prepared to get the scolding of a lifetime, followed by a swift transition into unemployment, Asako tells them not to worry about anything because she will be the one going to Alaska. Before they can even ask questions, she tells them not to make a fuss about it because she has already sent word to the head office. Moments later, they both get back to work and struggle to accept that Asako is really going to get transferred, while Itsuki continues teasing Gonda about the likelihood of him getting shipped off. Later that day, Asako takes them both out to talk and listens to their concerns over how the branch might fail without her before saying that they are all more than capable of handling themselves in her absence. She then tells them about how she spent most of her life traveling to a bunch of countries and eventually turned her love for travel into a career with the agency. Unfortunately, having to manage multiple branches as well as her responsibilities as a wife has made her life a lot less interesting, aside from the fact that she gets to take a trip to the Maldives with her husband every year. After she explains how thrilling it feels to live life on the edge, they ask if her husband is okay with her plans, so she explains how shocked he initially was when she first said it. Luckily though, he had also been thinking that marriage had slowed her down and offered his full support for the transfer. On the way back home, Takuya asks if Asako really chose Alaska out of her own free will, so Rika tells him that it's best to leave it at that because she really seems like the adventuring type. Once back in his apartment, they take off the rings and thank each other for all the effort put into maintaining their fake relationship. They then start a list of people in the office they have to apologize to before sorting out all the stuff they bought to make his apartment look like it belonged to a married couple. While throwing out all the stuff they no longer need, they start making up stories to delude themselves into thinking that they always hated the idea of marriage. After several minutes of making marriage sound like a mousetrap, Rika wishes him good night and starts heading out to catch the train. But the tears suddenly start to pour out while she walks away. Takuya, on the other hand, realizes that he is about to return to the exact same boring life that had started to feel a little depressing and decides to be spontaneous for once in his life. Just then, he takes off running and stops Rika before asking if they can get married, regardless of the fact that they still barely know each other. After admitting to not having the most romantic relationship or even starting off like an actual couple, they both decide to still get married to each other. After asking if he actually loves her just to be sure they aren't under the influence, she explains how having someone who understands how weird she is has always been a dream. He then confesses his love for her and she does the same, so they both go back to the park where their fake relationship started to make it a real one this time. After exchanging rings, they head over to the office and apologize to everyone before breaking the news of their official engagement. While everyone congratulates them, Shinshi warns that they might soon regret ever falling in love. Itsuki and the others then suggest throwing a party, but Asako reminds them to act like employees. While cleaning his apartment later that day, Takuya receives a call from the mystery stalker. But unlike all the other times, he congratulates Takuya on finally having enough balls to get married. After the call, he gets a text from Rika about some groceries she got, so he immediately runs over to the station to help her carry them home. To thank him, she offers to buy tea, and they spend a few minutes obsessing over the fact that they are actually getting married before she makes him sit through her attempt at becoming a travel documentary commentator. On the way home after that, their obsession with each other takes a turn for the worse, as merely looking at each other's shadows together makes them both ecstatic. Over the next couple of days, they quickly settle into being an actual couple and waste no time in spreading the news to their families. Will the lovebirds actually create the most romantic marriage to ever exist, or are they too intoxicated by the honeymoon phase to realize that marriage isn't all sunshine and rainbows? That's it for this video. Leave a comment if you liked it and don't forget to turn on post notifications after subscribing to see our next recap.